She was just the janitor, mopping floors, emptying trash, completely invisible to everyone, until the CEO heard her speaking fluent Mandarin, Spanish, and French like a native. What he did next, it didn't just change her life, it shook the entire company to its core. This isn't just a story about talent. It's about how easy it is to overlook brilliance in plain sight. Watch till the end to see how one moment flipped the corporate world upside down. It was a Monday like any other, at least on the surface. The Fort Worth skyline still glittered faintly with dew, the air heavy with early summer warmth that hadn't yet reached oppressive. Downtown was alive with movement, and inside the towering glass building of Hallberg International, everything buzzed with the ritualistic urgency of corporate life. The revolving doors spun non-stop as executives marched through in polished shoes. Assistants trailed behind, holding clipboards and coffee trays, and the occasional out-of-place vendor or visitor stood nervously by the lobby directory. Phones rang in quick staccatos. Elevator dings punctuated the air like background percussion. No one noticed the janitorial cart quietly tucked against the wall. No one paid attention to the woman pushing it, at least not at first. Jonathan Kellerman, CEO of Hallberg International, strode in with the exact posture of a man who owned the space he walked through. He wore a crisp blue suit, tailored precisely, a folder tucked under one arm, and AirPods in like a shield against interruptions. He instinctively turned his head toward the sound. His brain told him to expect someone from the Shanghai division, maybe someone from legal or global compliance. But what he saw instead confused him. Standing beside the touchscreen directory was a young woman in a burgundy janitor's uniform. Her hair was pulled back into a neat bun, her gloved hands relaxed at her side, a name badge clipped to her shirt, though he couldn't read it from here. She was speaking to an elderly Chinese gentleman who looked both lost and relieved at the same time. She was guiding him calmly, pointing to the elevators and smiling gently. Her voice had an assurance, a dignity to it, not rehearsed, not memorized, but lived. Kellerman blinked. It didn't make sense. He found himself stepping closer, curiosity overriding his mental to-do list. The man thanked her, bowing slightly, and shuffled toward the elevator. Before Kellerman could speak, another person approached her, a delivery man in a beige polo holding a clipboard and looking confused. Without missing a beat, the woman shifted languages. Spanish now. Again, fluent, natural. She didn't just know the words, she owned them. Within seconds, she helped the man figure out where to drop his packages. Kellerman's eyes narrowed, trying to process what he was seeing. This wasn't some corporate translator passing through. She was clearly part of the cleaning staff. He'd seen her before, late nights, after hours, always quiet, always unnoticed. And now here she was, carrying on in multiple languages like it was the most normal thing in the world. Before he could make sense of it, she turned again, this time addressing a vendor wheeling a cart of AV equipment toward the wrong set of conference rooms. French. This time it was French. Flawless. The kind of pronunciation you only hear in someone who has actually lived the language. Kellerman felt the air change. His pulse ticked up, not in alarm, but realization. How long had she been here? How had no one noticed this? He approached slowly now, less like a CEO and more like a detective walking into a mystery. The woman finished helping the vendor, and for the first time her eyes met his. She froze, just for a second. Not in fear, in recognition. As if she knew exactly who he was, but also wasn't sure why he was suddenly standing so close. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Yes, sir?" Her tone was polite, steady. "That was Mandarin, right? Earlier?" "Yes, sir." "And Spanish? And French?" he asked, brow furrowing. "Yes," she said again, then paused. "Also, Portuguese, German, Arabic, Italian, Swahili. I read Latin too, but I don't usually count that." He blinked. "You're telling me you speak 9 languages?" "Yes, sir." She didn't say it with pride or showmanship. No ego. Just facts. Delivered like she was reading a grocery list. He didn't know what to say. There was a moment of thick silence between them. A pause in the tempo of the building. Kellerman finally asked, "What's your name?" "Denise. Denise Atwater." He nodded slowly, then said the words even he didn't expect to say that morning. "Miss Atwater, are you free for a few minutes? I'd like to talk to you in my office." Denise hesitated just a second. Not fear, not surprise, just that cautious flicker of instinct people carry when they're used to being overlooked, underestimated, or questioned. Then she nodded softly. "Yes, sir." The elevator ride was quiet at first. The mirrored interior reflected two very different people. A corporate executive known for expansion deals in 6 continents, and a janitor who had just revealed she could have been his translator. As they ascended, Denise broke the silence. "I've worked here 13 years, she said, eyes on the floor number screen. "Never thought I'd be invited up." Kellerman looked at her. "You might be surprised how fast things can change." Denise gave no reply. Her face was composed, thoughtful. Her hands rested calmly in front of her, fingers still faintly smudged from cleaning fluid. When the elevator dinged on the 18th floor, Kellerman led her through the executive corridor. The hallway smelled of lemon polish, leather, and money. If you could bottle corporate privilege into a scent. The receptionist at the front desk looked up, stunned, watching Denise walk past in her janitor uniform beside the CEO. No one explained. No one needed to. Inside the office, Kellerman motioned for her to sit. She did, carefully. Her eyes scanned the space, not with awe, but with quiet curiosity. A world map behind the desk. Espresso cups on a side table. Photos of Kellerman's daughters in silver frames. She didn't look impressed. She looked aware. Kellerman sat opposite her, folding his hands. "I'll be honest with you, Denise," he said. "I didn't expect to have this conversation today." She nodded, unreadable. "But I just watched you speak 3 languages back to back like it was nothing, and I need to understand how that's possible." She didn't launch into a prepared story, no dramatic backstory, just the truth. "My dad was a linguist, taught at a college until he passed. We didn't have money for school. I cleaned houses with my mum in high school, picked up pieces of languages from the families we worked for, Spanish mostly. Then I got curious, taught myself through YouTube, old books, apps. Started listening in on meetings here when I was on late shifts. Watched training videos. Practiced with vending machine reps. Sometimes I'd write full translations just for fun." "You never thought to apply for a translator job?" Kellerman asked, shocked. "No degree," she replied simply. "Didn't think anyone would take me seriously. I like the night shift. It's quiet. I read more." Kellerman leaned back in his chair, stunned. Not just by the talent, but by the humility. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't chasing validation. She just existed with all this brilliance no one had noticed. And then it hit him. The most gifted communicator in the entire company had been pushing a mop through silent halls for over a decade, and no one, not HR, not managers, not even himself, had ever looked close enough to see it. He stood up slowly. "Denise, you don't belong in a janitor uniform." Her expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly around the hem of her pants. "I'd like to offer you something," he said, walking toward the window, "but only if you're interested." He turned back toward her. "I think we've just found the future of our global training division." And in that moment, everything changed, not just for Denise Atwater, but for Halberg International itself. The air in the CEO's office hung still, charged but quiet, like the space just before a storm shifts. Denise sat straight backed across from Kellerman, her uniform a stark contrast to the gleaming glass desk, imported leather chairs, an antique globe nestled behind her. She was an anomaly in this room, and yet she looked more composed than most executives he had interviewed in the past 5 years. Kellerman had conducted mergers in Tokyo and boardroom showdowns in Frankfurt, but this felt different. Not just because of what he'd witnessed downstairs, but because of what it revealed about him, his blind spot. 9 languages, he repeated under his breath, and no one knew. Denise's expression didn't waver. No one asked. That answer landed like a weight. For a moment, all the chatter of corporate inclusivity and upward mobility felt thin. Denise had been here, night after night, with a key to unlock half the world's cultures, and she'd been left to clean fingerprints off boardroom windows. He sat back and studied her face, not just curious now, but genuinely intrigued. "Tell me," he said, "where did this start? I mean, how did someone like you end up here?" Her eyes dropped to her lap for a moment, then returned to his. "My father was a linguistics professor. Small university. He believed language wasn't just communication. It was identity, music, history, power." She spoke slowly, like each sentence had been examined before. "When I was little, he'd play tapes of old dialects. I didn't even know they weren't English. They were just melodies." She glanced down at her hands. "When he died, we lost everything. My mother worked cleaning houses. I helped." She paused, her voice steady. "By 16, I was fluent in Spanish. By 22, I was cleaning offices at night and studying languages during lunch breaks." Kellerman leaned forward. "You taught yourself Mandarin?" Denise nodded. "Mandarin was hard, but once you understand tonal structures, you can build from there. Portuguese came easier after Spanish. French followed. German, harder vowels. Arabic, I loved the symmetry." She smiled faintly as if recalling a private joy. "I found an old university library on my bus route. Used to sneak in during slow shifts. Watched lectures online until my phone overheated. I'd paused trash collection to sound out words into empty stairwells." The image was jarring. This woman reciting German conjugations between empty recycling bins. "Why stay here?" he asked finally. "Why not apply somewhere else?" Denise's answer came without pause. "Because jobs want resumes. Degrees, titles, I had none. Only skill. That's not enough for most people." Kellerman sat still for a long time. This wasn't just a linguist. She was a genius. But genius in camouflage, hidden behind rubber gloves and Windex bottles. He stood up and walked toward the large map behind his desk. Tiny coloured pins marked Hallberg's offices in Sao Paulo, Berlin, Dubai, Tokyo. He stared at them, then back at her. "Do you know what I've spent the last year building?" he asked. "A global training initiative, cultural onboarding, real immersion. We've hired consultants, freelancers, remote trainers, and yet, not one of them could do what you just did downstairs in 10 minutes. Denise tilted her head slightly, measuring his words. "You want me to be a trainer?" "No," he said firmly. "I want you to design the program, build the model from scratch. Internal global fluency. That's the vision. You're the only person I've seen who can live it." Her eyes widened, but she said nothing. "Salary, support, team, office, whatever you need. But you'd start as director, full title." Denise blinked. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her. Not because she doubted her skill, but because no one had ever handed her power. "I clean floors," she said softly. "You did. Now you lead." Denise didn't say yes right away. She didn't leap from the chair, or hug him, or cry. Instead, she sat there in stillness, the kind that follows a seismic shift. "I need time," she said. "I've lived in shadows for so long. I'm not sure I know how to stand in the light." Kellerman respected that. "Take a week," he replied. "Think about it. Come back with questions, ideas, doubts, whatever you need." She nodded slowly and rose. As she stepped toward the door, he stopped her. "Denise." She turned. "Why Latin?" A small smile lifted her mouth. "Because it's dead, but every great civilization once whispered it." Then she left. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but it might as well have been thunder. That night, Kellerman didn't sleep, not out of anxiety, but because his mind couldn't stop racing. He reviewed every resume, every departmental budget, every diversity report, and he kept thinking, we missed her. For years. By Wednesday, Denise returned, not in uniform, but in a navy blouse and black pants. Simple. Still her. In her hand was a yellow legal pad. On it, diagrams, notes, lesson flows, cultural immersion strategies by region. She'd built a framework from scratch. Kellerman stared in silence as she explained, using German and Portuguese interchangeably to show adaptability and context switching. She even pointed out cultural missteps in Hallberg's past campaigns in the Middle East, offering real-time solutions. It wasn't just knowledge, it was insight. At the end of the session, she placed the pen down and looked at him. "I'll take the job," she said, "but on one condition." "Anything," he said. "I want to build a mentorship track for hidden voices, people like me." Kellerman nodded, swallowing a lump in his throat. Done. By Friday, the board had approved her title, Director of Global Cultural Strategy. She declined a PR spotlight, refused interviews. "I want the work to speak first," she said. But whispers spread through the company like wildfire. The janitor from the night shift was now a director. People stared at her in elevators, some with confusion, some with admiration, and some with guilt. But Denise walked past them all with quiet grace. She spent her mornings learning systems, afternoons designing modules, and evenings eating her dinner while reviewing cultural histories. Her old janitor cart was donated. Her nameplate was installed outside a new office. And on the door was something unusual, a world map, hand-drawn. A quiet nod to where it all began, and from that day forward, Kellerman kept a new motto framed on his desk. Look deeper. Genius doesn't always wear a suit. The elevator ride was silent except for the soft hum of floor numbers lighting up. Denise stood with her hands clasped in front of her, the scent of lemon floor cleaner still faint on her sleeves, even though she was now dressed in a sleek navy blouse. Her eyes flicked up to the digital panel above the door. Floor 8, Floor 9, Floor 18. She had been on every floor before, but always as part of the invisible crew. Now she was stepping into an office with glass walls, leather chairs, and a view of the entire city. As the elevator slowed to a stop, Kellerman gave her a small nod. Less of encouragement, more like acknowledgement. The doors opened, and his assistant's jaw nearly dropped. "This is Denise Atwater," he said, without slowing down. "She's joining us for a leadership meeting." They passed a string of curious stares, none more intense than from the HR director, who frowned slightly as Denise stepped into the main boardroom. "She's with you?" the HR director asked quietly. "Yes, she's our new Director of Global Cultural Strategy," Kellerman replied, cool and direct. That name alone created a ripple of silence across the room. Denise said nothing. She simply stepped forward and pulled out a chair like she belonged there. No one offered coffee. No one smiled, but she didn't flinch. The meeting began, stiff and formal. Charts, reports, budgets. Denise observed everything, reading not just the slides, but the way people talked around each other. Then, halfway through, it happened. A call came in from the Berlin office. A translation emergency. A major partner from Riyadh was insulted by a cultural misstep in the onboarding email. They were threatening to pull the entire contract. Panic bloomed in the room. Legal began typing. Marketing blamed the interns. HR froze. Kellerman turned to Denise. "Would you mind?" She stood slowly, walked to the speakerphone and said calmly in fluent Arabic, "Salam, I'm Denise Atwater. "May I speak with you directly?" A pause. Then a voice answered, "Of course." For the next 8 minutes, Denise transformed. Her voice changed tone and rhythm with ease, flowing between formal and conversational, navigating honorifics and dialect like someone tuning a piano. She didn't just apologize, she contextualized, empathized, and rebuilt the bridge. When the call ended, she turned to the room. "The Riyadh team is still upset, but they're willing to continue if we show sincerity and hire cultural reviewers for outbound materials. I'll send a list of candidates by tomorrow." Silence. Then Kellerman nodded. "Let's make that standard policy moving forward." Denise sat back down. The HR director adjusted in her seat. Someone from accounting whispered, "Who is she?" But Denise didn't respond. She was already reviewing the next slide on the presentation. By the time the meeting ended, no one questioned her title again. After the meeting, Kellerman pulled her aside. "You handled that perfectly," he said. Denise nodded politely, but her mind was already on the next problem. She had noticed that none of the internal training videos used subtitles or regional examples. She spent the rest of the day drafting a plan to make the content globally inclusive. By nightfall, she had a rough outline of a multilingual onboarding pipeline. She emailed it to Kellerman with a simple subject line, "Starting point." The next morning, the reply came from him directly, not his assistant. One word, "brilliant." But as her visibility increased, so did the scrutiny. Whispers in the hallway, side eyes in the elevator. "She's the janitor, right?" someone muttered. Denise heard it all. She didn't respond, not because she was weak, but because she was focused. She once mopped these floors while repeating Latin phrases under her breath. Now she was building systems that would touch every global branch Hallberg operated. On Thursday, a junior exec from the London office tried to quiz her in French during a video call. She answered in flawless French, then continued the conversation in German just to make a point. By the end of the week, she had earned an unofficial nickname from interns on the floor, the Polyglot Ninja. But the biggest test came the following Monday. The company's Japanese partners were arriving in person for a strategic rollout, and Denise was asked to moderate. She showed up early, wore a charcoal blazer, and had hand-translated all slide decks to match cultural norms. She opened the meeting with a respectful bow and began in formal Japanese. The guests smiled, genuinely. One of them, the eldest, leaned toward his translator and said, "She has good soul in her tone." The deal was signed that afternoon. Later, Kellerman found her on the rooftop terrace, sipping tea and staring out at the skyline. "I still feel like the elevator doors will close, and I'll wake up with a mop in my hand," she said softly. He sat beside her. "That version of you didn't fail. She endured. That's why this version exists." Denise looked at him for a long time. "Then I want to make sure no one else with a mind like mine stays invisible." He nodded. "You have the floor." And so she did. With every week, Denise transformed Hallberg's global operations, one culture, one voice, one story at a time. She became the face of change, not through force, but fluency. And it all started with one unexpected elevator ride. Denise sat across from Kellerman, the silence in his expansive office pressing down like the weight of unspoken stories. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk, fingertips steepled under his chin. Outside the glass wall behind him, Fort Worth's skyline glimmered under an early evening haze. The map of Hallberg's global offices hung just above his shoulder, dots and pins, neatly marked routes and corporate hubs. But the most remarkable coordinates in this room weren't on the map. "Tell me then," he said gently, "how does someone like you, no formal education, no resume, speak 9 languages better than anyone I've hired?" Denise didn't flinch. She sat upright, calm. "Books, YouTube, documentaries, old cassettes my dad left behind. A pause. I also listened to people around the building. Sometimes I'd follow the night shift up to the 14th floor just to hear the Korean finance team argue. They'd switch between English and Hangul when they got emotional. I'd go home and match the words to meaning. Kellerman's brow rose. You taught yourself Korean by eavesdropping on frustrated accountants. She nodded. Frustration has rhythm. You can learn a lot from rhythm. He leaned back slowly, something unspoken passing behind his eyes. Respect, maybe even shame. And your father? He asked. Denise looked away for the first time since entering the room. He was a linguist, spoke 6 languages fluently, worked as a translator for non-profits. We moved a lot. He said every new language was a new way of seeing the world. Her voice cracked faintly, just for a moment. He died when I was 14. After that, it was just me and my mum. Bills came faster than rent checks. I cleaned office buildings at night and stocked shelves at a bodega during the day. School was optional, but books weren't. Kellerman was quiet, his expression unreadable, as he stood and walked to the window. You've worked in this building for 13 years, he said. You cleaned every floor, and no one ever saw this side of you. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. He turned, arms crossed now. Did you ever try to apply for something more? Denise hesitated. Once, maybe twice, but those applications ask for degrees, referrals, linked portfolios. I had bleach stains on my sneakers and couldn't afford to print a resume. She let out a soft breath. Besides, people see janitors one way. Even the good ones don't look too long. That truth landed hard in the space between them. My first translation, she added suddenly, was for a Russian security guard on this floor 5 years ago. He was being questioned by HR. No one could understand him. I stepped in, helped. Afterwards, they thanked me, then asked me to clean the conference room. She smiled without humour. So I stopped offering. A long beat passed. I think, Kellerman said finally, we owe you more than thanks. He walked over to his desk, tapped a button, and called in his assistant. Set up a profile for Denise. I want her title officially listed by end of day. Global Cultural Strategy Director. And add a company-wide notice. He looked back at Denise. It's time they learned your name. But Denise didn't smile. Instead, she said quietly, don't make this a token promotion. If I'm doing this, I want full control, budget, hiring, project pipeline. Otherwise, I'm still just a janitor with a nicer badge. Kellerman's eyes met hers. Agreed. And just like that, a new department was born. Not from recruitment, but from recognition. That night, Denise sat on the edge of her bathtub in her 1-bedroom apartment, staring at the crumpled piece of paper she had pulled from her coat pocket. The company-wide announcement. Her name, her new title, an invitation to the Global Strategy Summit next quarter. The words felt surreal, typed in pristine Helvetica, approved by an executive board that hadn't known she existed last week. On the bathroom counter, her phone buzzed with messages, some congratulatory, some curious, others not so subtle in their suspicion. One email simply said, "So you're the new diversity hire?" She deleted it without reading further. Outside the window, a siren passed. She could hear the rustle of wind between buildings and the faint static of a neighbour's TV. This life, the one she'd built in shadows, was now stepping into the spotlight, and not everyone liked what they saw. The next morning, as she entered Hallberg HQ through the front entrance for the first time, her badge buzzed on a new floor, level 18. Eyes followed her, subtly at first, then openly. Some smiled politely, others frowned. She moved through it all with the same rhythm she'd once used to mop marble tiles, smooth, methodical, invisible where necessary. But this time, She carried a laptop instead of a mop and had a project timeline that would reshape the way Hallberg did business with every culture it touched. By Thursday, her new office was set up, smaller than Kellerman's, but facing the same skyline. A stack of multilingual training packets sat on her desk, and her first hire, a quiet software engineer who grew up in Nairobi and Paris, was already drafting an internal app to streamline localization. During her first department head meeting, someone asked her what KPIs she planned to track. Respect, she answered simply, measured by retention, trust surveys, and fewer cultural apologies. The room blinked at her, but Kellerman nodded. Over the next few weeks, Denise launched cultural review panels for every continent Hallberg operated in. She scheduled late-night calls with Taiwan, pre-dawn sessions with Brazil, and lunchtime debriefs with Morocco, all in their native languages. She learned new dialects between meetings. Interns started copying her phrases. Executives began double-checking their phrasing before hitting send. A shift was happening, not loud, not viral, but undeniable. One Friday afternoon, a custodian caught her in the break room and whispered, "I heard you were one of us." Denise smiled, held up her coffee mug, and replied, "I still am." In that moment, she wasn't just a promotion, she was a revolution, proof that brilliance doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears work boots and learns Portuguese after midnight. The email from Kellerman's office was sent at 7:03 a.m. sharp. Subject line, Personnel Update, Leadership Appointment. Inside, it contained just 3 paragraphs, clean, polished, and corporate. But the third line hit harder than any press release the company had put out in years. "We are proud to announce Denise Atwater as Head of International Onboarding and Language Training." By noon, the internal memo had leaked. By 3 p.m., it was trending on LinkedIn. Janitor to executive, the story Hallberg International never saw coming. Bloggers wrote think pieces. Journalists made calls. One video of Denise giving brief directions in Portuguese, French, and Arabic got 2 million views in 48 hours. The media dubbed her the multilingual Cinderella. But inside Hallberg's walls, the reaction was anything but fairy tale. Some clapped in elevators, some whispered in corners. One mid-level manager even posted a cryptic status: "Merit matters, not moments." HR scrambled to hold bias training. Kellerman ignored the noise publicly, but privately ordered a full audit of internal hiring practices. Denise? She showed up early the next morning in a navy blouse, not flashy, just dignified. She made coffee the same way she used to for the janitorial night crew, then walked straight into a strategy meeting with the legal team and proposed a 5-country language initiative that would save $2.6 million in translation overhead. They listened. Not because they were told to, because she knew more than they did. But Denise wasn't after headlines. What mattered to her was what happened on the quieter floors, the underfunded training rooms, the crowded intern desks, the overlooked customer service departments where most real human contact happened. That was where her change would stick. Within a week, she had launched a language pilot program for frontline staff, receptionists, call center employees, facilities, those who interfaced with actual people. She introduced a language ladder system: complete a level, earn a bonus. Speak to a client in their native tongue, log the interaction. The numbers would speak for themselves. But while Denise poured herself into this mission, the pressure mounted. Journalists wanted interviews. Morning shows sent emails. PR wanted her in makeup. One anchor even asked if she'd wear her old uniform for the segment. She declined politely and didn't show up. The moment was bigger than her image. Meanwhile, other companies began calling Kellerman's office, Fortune 500 firms asking if Denise would consult, speak, advise. Some even offered to buy the entire onboarding program. But Denise was still waking up at 5:30, brewing strong coffee and reviewing new dialect modules between meetings. She still walked home, still answered every intern who emailed her, still thanked the janitorial team in 5 languages before leaving the building each night. And one day, while reviewing internal survey data, she noticed something that made her pause. Employee retention in diverse departments had spiked, not slightly, significantly. Culture was shifting, not from policy, from presence. Everything changed when the mayor's office called. They wanted to honor Denise during the annual Fort Worth International Unity Conference. It wasn't just a photo op, they wanted her to keynote. The theme, Language as Leadership. Kellerman was thrilled. PR prepared a packet. But Denise hesitated, not because she feared public speaking. She had addressed people in a dozen languages before, but because the story being told wasn't the one she lived. They want the headline, she told Kellerman in a private meeting, but that's not the story. He looked at her across the conference table. What is the story then? She leaned forward, fingers laced. It's not about the janitor who became an executive. It's about how we ignored brilliance until it wore a suit. He didn't speak, just nodded slowly. Denise accepted the keynote on one condition. She would bring 3 people with her to the stage. A former custodian who now led training modules in Spanish. An intern from Ghana who built the onboarding app prototype. And an elderly receptionist who learned conversational Japanese just to greet a visiting CEO properly. When she took the stage at the event, the crowd was already standing. She didn't open with her backstory. She opened with Swahili, then German, then Spanish, then silence. That, she said finally, is the sound most people hear when they're not being listened to. The room froze. I cleaned your offices for 13 years, she continued. I was fluent the whole time. You just didn't speak the language of recognition. Back at Hallberg, the ripple became a wave. Departments started requesting cultural training sessions. Job applications added language exposure as an optional skill field, not a requirement, but a window. International partners sent handwritten notes, some in languages Hallberg had never formally acknowledged. But the most profound shift happened quietly, weeks later, in a glass conference room on the 12th floor. A young intern, barely out of undergrad, stood up during a team meeting. Nervous, palms sweating, he apologized before switching from English to Italian, trying to explain a product error flagged by a European distributor. The room didn't blink. They listened. They understood. Because Denise had created an atmosphere where voices weren't judged by accent, fluency, or title, but by clarity and heart. She saw the intern later that day and smiled. I heard you, she said. He beamed. Because being heard in your own language isn't just professional, it's human. And that was Denise's real legacy. Not the promotion, not the press, but the quiet courage she handed to others, like a baton in a race no one knew they were running. Because brilliance doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it holds a mop and speaks 9 languages and waits patiently until someone finally listens. And just like that, a quiet janitor became the loudest voice in the building, not by raising her tone, but by raising the bar. Denise didn't just change departments, she changed perspectives. She reminded us that talent doesn't always arrive with titles, and that brilliance doesn't ask for permission. It waits to be seen. So the next time you pass someone society tends to overlook, ask yourself, what story haven't I heard yet? Because the most powerful voices are often the ones we've ignored the longest. If this story moved you even a little, don't scroll away. Hit that like button so more people see stories that inspire. Drop a comment below. What language would you love to learn? And subscribe if you believe in stories that remind us we're all more than what we seem. Thanks for watching. And remember, greatness often speaks softly. You just have to listen.